The following is a presentation of Moonlight Media Works. Welcome back to another edition of the Collins Janus Show, Moonlight Media Works production. We are recording this one a little bit early. We usually tape these on Thursday nights and then drop them to the world on Friday, but this Thursday, I am on a flight to Houston, Texas. First trip to Texas for me, to watch the World Baseball Classic, the 2026 edition. Watch Team USA play a couple rounds in Houston, Texas there in what was formerly Minute Maid Park. I believe it's Daikin Park now in Houston. Big, exciting trip, getting to go out and watch some of the best, players in the world play in this setting. Team USA's roster is going to be a lot of fun to watch. There will be other teams like Mexico as well there. There are 20 countries represented in the WBC across three sites to play their pool rounds. And this is one of the main sites. You've got some of the more local teams. You got Great Britain, you've got Mexico, you've got Brazil, you've got a couple of those teams playing in Houston. You have schools. Schools. It's one big school. Yeah, the entire Dominican Republic is just one big college. Yes, no. You have countries playing in these different pool locations. So, like the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, they'll play in Miami, and so on and so forth. So it'll be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. But of course, we couldn't get to that point without going through the controversies that lead into it. We talked a little bit about the World Baseball Classic last week. Team USA roster, we talked about it. Very exciting. Pitching, however, going to be the difference maker in this tournament. As is often the case, where we saw Japan defeat the United States last time around back in 2023, when you have a guy like Shohei Ohtani who can come in and pitch when necessary. You have those guys. You're getting a lot of the best players in Japan signing up for this roster, even if they don't play in Major League Baseball. And the hard part of a lot of these countries is the insurance providers, the team commitments, all those things. And baseball, or not baseball doesn't exist. That's another great podcast. Actually, it is Baseball Doesn't Exist. My correction there. Baseball Doesn't Exist, the podcast, with one of the former hosts of Baseball is Dead. Very confusing podcast names, all great, check them out. Broke down the insurance provider situation for the WBC. And the way it works is this. When Major League Baseball in 2006 came up with the WBC, they said to teams, look, we know you don't want your players playing in these games. You don't want to risk them getting hurt, like we saw with Edwin Diaz at the Mets a couple years ago. So here's what we're willing to do. We are willing to pay, for that player for the year. If you lose a player for the year, or you lose a player for an extended period of time, we're willing to pay for that. So if a player's making like $30 million, okay, we'll foot the bill. We want them to play in this. But obviously Major League Baseball is like, well, we're not actually going to pay all that money. So what they did was they roped in insurance providers and got them to, eat half or, a percentage of that amount of money. So when you see players like Mike Trout or Francisco Lindor get, dinged for not being able to play based off insurance, that's what they mean. If they can't get a coverage for it because of an extended injury history, that's the way it works. And now the only way you restrict players not based off that is if a team has a pitcher who injured their arm during the season prior to the WBC. That's the only way a player gets held out of the games by a team. Now, the only other way, like we mentioned, is the insurance provider situation. So, just to quell all of our excitement for these games, we have to talk about this nonsense, but one of the main stars on the projected USA roster back when these first were released just a couple months ago, Tarik Skubal, arguably the best starter in Major League Baseball today, came out and made it clear he's only going to pitch one game. And everybody's like, first of all, everybody couldn't remember how many games there were, so that sounded kind of, arrogant to say, well, I'm only going to pitch one. And because of how everybody else is handling the WBC, one of the things I love is that, especially on the U.S. roster and on the Dominican Republic roster and on the Japanese roster, is how much these players get up for these games. If you ask a lot of these players, this game means as close to an Olympics kind of scenario as you can get. And obviously, the Olympics is on the baseball calendar in the coming years, so it's kind of a precursor to them actually getting back into the Olympics. But for players, especially in their home countries, getting to represent their home countries, this is a big deal. And, we worry about with the way U.S. athletes are nowadays. Do they care? Do they not care? Is this just a glorified exhibition? A lot of the other countries outside the U.S. certainly don't treat it that way. If you watch the footage from the games that are played today, we're recording this on Tuesday. I believe Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, their fan bases have gone bananas for just these scrimmage games, basically, these exhibition matchups, tune-ups during spring training for these squads. And it's been incredible to watch. But credit where credit's due. Mark DeRosa and the entire Team USA roster, they built a great roster of guys that wanted to be there. Unfortunately, Tarik Skubal, kind of making it abundantly clear based off of whoever made this decision, 1 game, 55 pitch limit, that's it. Now, here's what makes this interesting. Tarik Skubal's up for a contract at the end of the year. He's going to get an absolute bag of money. That's a fact, as long as his arm does not fall off. And we understand that. And that is the trick, especially with pitchers in these tournaments. Like we talked about, Edwin Diaz missing the season after getting hurt in the WBC. Now, again, it could just as easily have happened in, a spring training game, just a scrimmage, just a practice. It doesn't matter. But to come out and just waste a roster spot by saying, yep, 55 pitches, and I'm reporting immediately back to the Tigers after that game. Okay, then why the hell are you wasting a roster spot, dude? Give it up to somebody else, because here's the thing. You have to want to do this. Nobody puts a gun to your head and says, all right, play in the game. And the USA roster is already down another starter because Joe Ryan got hurt during spring training and got scratched from his appearances on Team USA's roster. So now your rotation was supposed to be Skubal, Ryan, Skeens, Logan Webb, and, Clayton Kershaw and a couple other guys floating around back there. Now, 1 game only out of Skubal, and it's against Great Britain. No disrespect to Great Britain, but if we need Tarik Skubal that badly to pitch 55 pitches against Great Britain, then we done messed up somewhere else down the line on this roster. That's a humongous waste of time. I think the leading player on the Great Britain roster is Jazz Chisholm. Whoa, I'm scared. Shaking in my boots at Jazz Chisholm. God, don't even get me started on some of the guys that are just like, wait, why are you on this roster? I know you weren't born. It doesn't matter. Some of those are fine. Some of them aren't. I think Aroldis Chapman trying to pitch for Great Britain, that was a bit confusing. Had to go a ways back. And he was denied because the family tie wasn't strong enough to get that connection. Now, a lot of times you'll see like guys go play for their family's country of origin, maybe not their own, but you'll see guys play for like Israel or play for Puerto Rico or something like that along those lines. And that's fine. But some of these are a stretch at best. But the point is, now that you're a little bit thinner, there's a great pressure to want to win this game because they haven't won this since, I believe, 2017 was the last time the Team USA roster won the WBC. And there's a great energy to want to win. Again, we remind you that it's America's birthday, big birthday year, celebrating a big birthday this year. Team USA in the Olympics just had a bang-up run in Milan over in Italy. And I mean, let's be real over here. There's a real tangible energy around these games. You've got the other rosters we talked about, Japan and the Dominican Republic and Cuba and Puerto Rico and all these. They're not messing around. So if you come into this half-assing it or lackadaisical, you're going to get absolutely knocked out of the box. And it's just frustrating to see a guy like Tarik Skubal be like, yep. And look, I'm not saying it's all his fault, but I do think the people handling him in this situation should be ashamed of wasting a roster spot. Give it to some, because again, he's pitching the first game that counts, really. Do we need that badly? If you're only going to pitch him one game, pitch him in the championship game if they get that far. If not, then you're off the hook, kid. I mean, seriously. Paul Skeens is going to get 2 starts. Logan Webb's going to get 2 starts. Clayton Kershaw said he'd throw 1,000 pitches. He's retired. He doesn't care. If he has to throw 80 innings, he'll do it. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous, but he's committed. The guys on this roster are committed that want to be here. And it's just frustrating to see a guy waste a spot when we had months to figure this out. And if you were saying, okay, my contract coming up at the end of the year is too important to me, or the Tigers saying, hey, we don't want to do this, we can't afford to lose him, this might be our last year with him because we sure as shit ain't paying him all that. Okay, you just hold him out of the games altogether. Do that. Don't waste our time. So it's frustrating as hell. It really is. Especially when you get the buy-in from everybody else that we've already talked about. So there you go. We'll report back with what we get from the WBC. And if you follow us on TikTok or on Instagram, Twitter, I'll be posting stuff throughout the weekend there. It'll be a lot of fun. Be down there Thursday through Sunday and then come back Monday. And then you'll get to see my smiling face again next week. So you won't miss any episodes. In fact, you'll probably get this one a little bit earlier. So that'll be cool. Moving down the list on tonight's show, we had a couple of big news in the TV movie industry of the world. It's something I deeply enjoy, as has been abundantly clear from the first couple episodes. There was the series premiere, I should say, of the Yellowstone spinoff on CBS, Marshals, which was formerly titled Why Marshals, as in Yellowstone, why? Which they dropped from the branding of the show, which is important to add clarification as to what I'm about to talk about. Because if you're like me, you loved Yellowstone for the grand Western epic that it was on Paramount Plus. And, you know, the show obviously went through battles with Kevin Costner and Taylor Sheridan over the end of the end of the series. They finish it up, probably not in the way that a lot of people wanted to see it end, but I think it was pretty close to the way it was going to end. Obviously, Kevin Costner would have been involved in more, but I think you got the ending you were basically going to get. That's what Taylor Sheridan has said, and that's kind of what I believe. But at the end of the day, that one ends up, and we still have a lot of these characters that we're going to get spinoffs, we're going to deserve spinoffs, and probably going to, you know, do well in a spinoff scenario. Now, Casey, the son of John Dutton, one of the breakout stars, and Luke Grimes of the show, one of my personal favorite characters in the show, gets his as the first of the Dutton family, the modern Dutton family spinoffs. You obviously have 1883 and 1923. You know, you have those spinoffs available already on Paramount Plus. The Madison is another one, and I'm not entirely sure how that family fits into the Yellowstone spinoff, but it's just a Taylor Sheridan production. And if you're like me, you give a Taylor Sheridan production your attention. But what I want to clarify with this is not a true, this is not a proper Taylor Sheridan production. It's his character in his setting with some of his other characters involved, but he's not in charge of this show. And he agreed and gave his blessing to Luke Grimes to do this show for CBS, who was, you know, through Paramount, a partner in the creation of Yellowstone and its streaming platform. So there was a lot of hype and anticipation built around, well, Casey Dutton, he's got a new chapter in his life. In Marshals, he's going to become a U.S. Marshal in Montana and kind of continue some of those great battles across the land we saw during the show of Yellowstone. In fact, 9.5 million people tuned in, making it the largest audience for a scripted show premiere in the last 7 years on television. And again, it's episode 1. I want to temper this, and I'm not going to give you any spoilers. So if you haven't seen it and you're interested in watching it, by all means, go do watch it. And I'm going to continue watching it even after I tell you what I'm about to tell you, which is somewhat fair, somewhat unfair. I will preface it that if you were tuning into this because you love Yellowstone and you think this will be anything like that, you're going to be disappointed. If you're tuning in because you love the character of Casey from Yellowstone, temper one's expectations, because this show is more of a CBS cop kind of, you know, paramilitary kind of procedural show. It is very paint by numbers in that regard, in that it's a guy being recruited into something. an elite force of some sort, and we've seen it done and caricatured over in TV forever. And I guess my ultimate disappointment comes from two different things. One is just the pacing. I have been spoiled like so many others through streaming, giving us more time to delve into character development, spread out a story a bit more and really tell a nuanced tale to these characters. And sometimes it drags because of that, and people complain about that. But in reality, more time is generally a good thing. I understand there are some people like, I just want to get through shit so fast. I don't care. I don't need to be sitting here for 3 hours watching a Martin Scorsese movie. I'm like, okay, whatever, fine. But generally not having to be rushed is a great thing for art / film / TV. That's generally the best case. When you have an hour-long time slot on one of the big networks, CBS, you have to fly through the pacing of it. And I think that ultimately hurt this first episode. And I'm saying this full knowing I'm going to watch and continue to give the series a chance. I think my biggest disappointment comes from the second point, though, which is Yellowstone as a brand. Obviously, the last season may not have been everybody's favorite. It is often the case with, popular shows. The landing, they never stick the landing in some people's eyes. No matter what they choose to do, they can never stick the ending. But at the same time, it's a respected brand. It's a brand that is deeply cared about. It's a story that's deeply cared about. The Dutton family name in television does matter an awful lot to people like me and so many others. And I think what I'm most disappointed by is not the performance by anybody involved, because you've got Gil Burgum, you've got Mo Brings Plenty, some of the great characters from Yellowstone involved in this. You've got Tate Dutton as well. It's not their performances per se. I think the material is lacking a bit in that obviously Taylor Sheridan is not a writing force behind it. And Taylor Sheridan, despite some of the critiques, some fair, some unfair about Taylor Sheridan's work, I think a lot of times dialogue and, kind of pacing is something he does generally do well when he's more involved, and some of the showrunners that he has involved. Now, we've seen that trouble some of his other shows like Tulsa King the last year, and to some extent, we saw some of those issues play a hand in Landman's last season. But the pacing and the dialogue and just kind of the forced nature of the way we just ran through this first episode, it put a character that I really loved in Casey Dutton and just made it a caricature of what it was. Because I think I see the criticism a lot of times of Yellowstone is it's so outlandish and it's, nothing like that happens in Montana and about ranching and all this stuff. And I think they almost took that criticism and were like, well, we'll just put him as a marshal and then it's okay if he goes fighting off into the wilderness with, a couple other, badged members of the U.S. Marshals and stuff. And if they're having to, interrupt terror plots or whatever, it's just, it becomes every other schlock thing when you do it like this. And if you're like me, Yellowstone does not deserve to be treated like that. And that's exactly why I think they dropped the Y from the Yellowstone branding from the show. So it's just marshals. So you're getting a character that everybody already liked, or a lot of people already liked, and you're building a show around them. And it also breeds a little bit of concern as to what the future of a spinoff with Beth and Beth Dutton and Rip Wheeler. He should basically be a Dutton at this point. He kind of is. He's the adopted son. What it ultimately comes down to, I didn't want this to fall into a formulaic, boring schlock. Oh, we got to go catch this guy. We got to go interrogate him over there. Yeah, what do you know? Oh, they're hiding him over here, and we got to run through this in an hour. Like, it's just every time something gets going, commercial. Wait a minute, how did they find that? Yeah, he just happened to be in this room here, and it's just like, it's part of a reason why my generation has such a hard time with TV. It's like, you got to give us time here, guys. One thing we love about, Mindhunter, we love about Yellowstone, what we love about, The Sopranos and being on HBO and some of those other platforms is they give you the time. And the problem that network television has is they got to jam all this shit in there as fast as humanly possible. Then we got to show you a commercial for Ram. And we got to show you a commercial for Cialis, for Men Daily. I don't know. I get it, but golly, don't do this to the characters I love. And I'll give it a chance. I'm going to give it a chance. I just was not overly impressed, and I was kind of disappointed. And again, I had to reassess my own expectations, kind of re-stagger them, kind of put them back in check, and we'll go from there. But we're not done with the Paramount side of things, because Paramount made the move, I believe it was last week, to make the play and finally get their hands around the Warner Brothers Studios deal there, Warner Brothers Discovery. And let me start by saying, as a movie fan, my favorite studio growing up for movies and the projects that I care about the most, like The Godfathers 1 and 2, you can go through those movies, Chinatown, some of the great movies of the 70s like that. You've got the first couple Indiana Jones were Paramount Productions before Disney bought the rights to all that. You've got Top Gun. You've got so many iconic film franchises. A lot of things like that, like Days of Thunder, which we've talked about on here. You can go down the list of movies that Paramount has been, and I'm missing a bunch, and I understand. You can drop them all in the comment, whatever. Paramount as a kid, to me, was my favorite movie studio. And I don't know that I laid too heavy into that as a younger person, but as a teenager and adult up, I always kind of looked at Paramount as like, I love Paramount. Now, I'm a big Clint Eastwood fan. Warner Brothers was the house for all his stuff. What's really upsetting to a lot of people is the fact that Paramount Skydance is now going to own Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery, HBO, all these different platforms under those respective banners. And it creates a huge conglomerate of things, between like CNN, you've got other properties under that banner that you don't even think about. And the entire list is out there if you want to see it all. But there's already been so much scrutiny around Paramount Skydance with the way their relationship with CBS and their whole dealing with the last year and their sale, and the idea of trying to buy out Warner Brothers, who was for sale. The company that bought Warner Brothers basically bought them with the intent to sell it at some point, so they were never really in the business of keeping it for long. And Warner Brothers as a studio itself has bounced around from hand to hand throughout its career as a studio. So it's frustrating that they had to be put up for sale at all. Because I think if you're like me and you do kind of have a reverence and an appreciation for the Hollywood studio system and kind of what the history of those franchises has, it is disappointing. And I can't sit here and nitpick it like somebody who's a true cinephile and giving you, I swear, the first second you got an itch, around the old mustache, you can't stop. And now I'm looking at myself on camera and I'm going, golly. Sidetrack aside, I can't sit here and break it down to you like some master student of film, but at the same time, in a perfect world, Warner Brothers doesn't need to be sold to anybody, but Warner Brothers has been a, business hot potato forever. So it's disappointing, but to me, it would have been more disappointing for Warner Brothers to wind up in the hands of Netflix than Paramount. Paramount at least still puts forth the idea, okay, we want studios making movies. We're going to keep these entities separate. That's what they've come out and said. So that's not me kind of, talking for them. That's what they've come out and said. Now, they could all be bullshit, but that's the way they phrased it. And to me, I think overall, you've got some of the DC stuff that's under the Warner Brothers thing. You've got HBO that's under that banner. And some of those properties are really well managed and really, fun to watch. And you don't want to see any of that tarnished by a deal like this. So what does this mean? You're going to have one really, really humongous company in entertainment. And, Paramount Skydance was already that before this deal. Now, if it ever actually gets completed, now that's the tricky part. They moved Netflix out of the way, basically. Netflix dropped out after Paramount made a hostile takeover type offer deal situation, and I'm not a business insider perfectly understanding the nuances of how that broke down, but nonetheless, Netflix was the leading bidder. Paramount moved them out of the way. Paramount gets to control Warner Brothers, and now it's up to all the regulators and all that fancy stuff as they go through the idea of it. But they'll start rolling out things and starting their process of trying to make that deal finalized, but it is disappointing. I understand why people say it's sad to lose one of the big studios out of the equation. But at the same time, Netflix to me was a much worse diagnosis for this situation than if Paramount does exactly what they're going to do. And if what they say they're going to do, I think is a better alternative for the Warner Brothers brand and its entities than Netflix. And I could be wrong, but that's just my interpretation of it from this perspective. So a lot of big moving deals down. You didn't know you were going to get that here on the Collins Janus Show, but we care about a lot of shit on this show. It ain't just sports, it ain't just movies, it ain't just what happened with the dog the other day. It's everything and all in between. So come for one, come for all here on the Collins Janus Show. Now toward the kind of humorous, fun side of this stuff on the show this week, I got to tell you something. I am 27 years old. I just recently joined TikTok, so I'm late to the party on a lot of social media. I admit, full disclosure, I didn't get on to like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, probably till I was like a freshman in high school. They were very early on in the phases of it. First of all, Facebook seemed like a thing for your parents. Twitter, I got on first, so when I went to camp one summer, I could tweet about stuff. It was back when I was in the BSA and we went to Jamboree. It was a big deal, and it's a big nationwide event, so it's kind of cool, and you can interact using Twitter. So I got a Twitter account out of that. But I was late to the party on Instagram and Snapchat, and if it weren't for a couple people convincing me to get it back in high school, there's probably a good chance that I would have been later to getting to it even than I was. And I enjoyed, Snapchat for what it was. I enjoy Instagram still for what it is, and Twitter and Facebook. But I had neglected the idea of TikTok for a long time. A, because of the whole, information, data mining, and all the things that came out with the previous company that owned TikTok before. I believe it's ByteDance, I believe is the company that owns them now. It is an American company. There was a lot of that shit I just wasn't interested in being a part of. And, probably somebody could have been like, you're crazy for having worried about that shit. It is what it is. I also thought, because when I was growing up, I used Snapchat to do videos and post things and share with my friends at the time. And that's more like what TikTok is. It's for more the video content and stuff. Now that we're doing this show and I'm in a different frame of mind and I'm just interested in creating content here at Moonlight Media Works, that's fine. We'll play the game. If Jeff Perlman, our friend from our second episode, can come on and say he joined TikTok because he thought it was a benefit, then my 27-year-old ass can join TikTok and do the same. And I've been on there for a couple weeks, and it's fun, but it's fun getting to share stuff, and I appreciate everybody that's liked and shared and reposted, followed the account there. It's just my personal, so there's going to be stuff that has all to do with this channel and all these things to do with that, and then it's just my own personal musings and ramblings and other things like that. So it'll be what it is. But one thing I definitely don't enjoy about this period of time, and again, every generation has this, so before you come at me with your parents had this and their parents had that, I have to tell you, what's becoming exhausting now is the idea that I have to, at 27, is having to keep up with just the dumb ways we butcher the English language and the ways that people communicate through some of these things. Because again, I work in the communications field. That's my profession. My degree up over on the wall over there, you can't see it, and I'm not turning the camera right now because I won't be able to get it back the way I want it to. The diploma up there is a bachelor's of arts in mass communications from Winthrop University. Go Eagles. It's a part of my being to be in the communications media, content field. But golly, the trends and the things that people find interesting and that gain actual, clicks and views and stuff is just nauseating shit. It really is. It's just the lowest common denominator crap. And it's funny because you hear in my line of work all the time, you have to work down to the lowest common denominator. You have to treat everybody like they don't understand what you're talking about. You have to talk down. You have to do this. First of all, I don't approve of that thought process. And I understand that maybe what I do is not accessible to everybody. I understand that. If you don't like what I do, that's fine. I completely get it. I'm a man obsessed with a lot of niche interests, a lot of things that have become marginalized that don't matter to the mainstream anymore, and that's fine. But I know the audience and the internet is big enough that there are people that will appreciate what I do, and there are a lot more people outside of me doing content than I want to see. And I will gladly support them. And I always support content creators who I appreciate. And I make it a big deal to go out and tell you about them because I want this stuff to survive. And in the era of AI and just slop bull, it's just disappointing. And it's disappointing what attracts and, gets people like, dude, he's jester maxing so hard in this video. I'm like, why do I have to pretend to know what the hell that means? I don't want to pretend to know what that means. But if I go out in public and people are using it and I have to pretend to go, yeah, he's definitely aura farming that. Yeah, he's definitely jester maxing and all that stuff. I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing? We move further and further from reality every minute. And I could rant about AI as well because I have a lot of friends that create content as well. And I hate artificial intelligence creating content. It's disgusting. It's low rent. It's cheap. And everybody on your parents' Facebook page is using it now. And I worry to God about what like my parents get put on like their profiles or whatever, because they're good. My parents are smart. They don't get fooled by stuff easily. But God knows there are people your parents' age or older that are on Facebook right now reposting AI videos of a cat in a flood. And the cat has like Garfield eyes. Like, Jesus Christ, guys, what are we doing here? We have got to put some guardrails up in life before this shit gets way too far out of hand. And it probably already is. I mean, we're draining, lakes full of water to power for these AI data centers and all that stuff. All those jokes that have already come out and all the power, wranglings that are going to come out of the data center movement. So there's a lot of things that come out of it. But between AI slop that generates all the attention on social media and then just the dumb trends and the dumb slang that people use nowadays, it's just disappointing. It really is. There's no way around that. And if you come up to me with some of that stuff, I'm just going to look at you like you got 6 heads. So it's disappointing. And I get it. I'm in the minority. I am not the majority anymore. That's disappointing but true. And I found out the other day, and this shit drives me nuts too, the idea that like we're always trying to figure out and reset the goalposts as to what generation of group timeline you are. Like, obviously there's Gen X and Gen Z and millennials. And I found out that I'm a part of a subculture in between those two. I'm a zillennial because I'm between Gen Z and millennial because I was born in 1998. Like, and first of all, why the hell it matters to anybody, I can't figure out. I mean, I almost get a zodiac sign more than I understand why it matters what demographic of people based on a timeline I was born in. I was born in the end of the 90s. That's it. It's as simple as that. But we spend a lot of time breaking that down. And if somebody can explain to me why it matters, by all means, I give you my comments section. Go for it. Go wild. Crazy. Do whatever you want. I'm really over a lot of these things. It's disappointing because it's a part of the culture. And again, if you want to be involved in the culture, you deal with some of this shit. But it's disappointing and demoralizing. It's just, you see, even the 6'7" jokes, like, it's funny, I guess. And I now do it ironically just to piss off my friends. But like, that's dumb. But it matters to people, and it's a big trendy thing to do on TikTok. You do the dances and all that shit. That's part of the other reason why I wouldn't get on TikTok forever. I'm like, I'm not going to do dances. I'm not going to, do some of the weird challenges. Like, it just, maybe at a different point in my life. Had TikTok come around maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe it'd be different. And obviously, I'm not sitting here talking like somebody like, oh, I'm 35. I have to be pristine and proper. Like, I'm wearing a ball cap, by the way. Go out and support my friends at Biz Baits. That's whose hat this is. They'll be out at the Bassmaster Classic up in Knoxville, Tennessee next week at the Expo Center there for all the big events there. And if you want to go online and check them out, I worked for Biz Baits for a period of time. I don't actually know how long because I was an on and off, and a good friend of mine took my job one day when I had the flu, and he basically kept working for them after I said, yep, I kind of got to wind this whole thing down. But their family, I love to support them. I fished for them as a college angler, and I continue to represent the brand with the highest and most upward attitude and positivity for it. I love the company. I love Brian, the founder, and what he meant to me in my work career, and Jairus and Tyler and Ian and Lewis and all the guys there. I love all those guys dearly. So check out BizBaits. Proudly rep them on this show. They're not paying me for this, but trust me, their family, they matter to me. And if you're in the fishing brand market and you want to buy fishing tackle and such, lures, these are the guys to go check out. Made in America. They got all the guys working in a shop in North Carolina. I mean, they're putting them together. I did it for a period of time. I'd come home from a day of work in there during college and smelling like plastic and WD-40. So those guys put in the work. They're doing all that stuff. They're packaging all the stuff, and they do a great job over there. So check out BizBaits if you have a chance and you need a lure. Tell them I sent you. They'll find that funny. We get a couple other things before we get to our final segment of the night, which is, and I haven't got to figure. You can tell this show is a work in progress, by the way, because I don't have an order to any of this stuff. It's just the way I wrote it down on this big yellow legal pad. Look, scribblings. But we're going to end the show with a reoccurring segment of what's got my attention. You saw last week it was Marcus King's last album from last fall, Darlin' Blue, which I told you about and love that record. It was great getting to listen to it. We've got another topic, and it's not just going to be albums every week. And we are close to launching our second spinoff of this show, which is going to be my record collection show and kind of working through. It's going to be called The Records Rehash, and it'll be a reoccurring show talking about the history and the making of some of my favorite albums. I'll give you a track-by-track review. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I've got a good and expansive record collection, ever-expansive record collection. Just picked up a couple the other day. I was very excited. I was down in Wilmington, like I told you back last week. Picked up a copy of Come Taste the Band by Deep Purple, a Sam and Dave record, and I believe a B.B. King record. So I got a couple of really cool albums. Haven't even had a chance to spin them all, but it's a lot of fun, and I love playing records. I actually have to get my stereo system kind of figured out because I can't go too long without my records, man. I mean, I have Spotify. I listen to music in the car, but when I'm at home and I got the dog and I can just listen to records, it's the best. Do want to talk briefly, and we'll get into this next week. Once the conference championships start really rolling off, it is March Madness season. We're going to give you some picks and other things to keep an eye on during the month of March into April for the tournament. The projected one seeds, that's always a topic, that you're looking forward toward the beginning of March. And since the conference championships are starting this week, it's easy to look at, some of the top seeds in the March Madness tournament and start to give you some of the thoughts about them. I think a couple teams, those have pretty much been locked in sync for a while now, And as I'm actually trying to pull this back up and talk at the same time, just to give you an idea of where we're projecting out the one seeds based off of this. So there's a couple discussion topics about the last seed, but generally speaking, your one seeds coming into the tournament are going to be Duke, Michigan. Right now, I believe the spot up for grabs, you've got, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the third seed, I'm trying to pull this up, is Arizona. And the discussion is for the fourth seed. One program that is near and dear to my heart and love watching with that crazy madman on the sidelines. I love him so much. Dan Hurley and the UConn Huskies are in the mix. I believe Florida's in the mix as well as Houston. So you've got a couple interesting storylines to watch play out there. UConn really improved their stock with a big-time win over St. John's, the largest margin of victory in a matchup between St. John's and UConn in their respective program histories. So that was an awesome win against a team that has given UConn problems even during this last really dominant stretch they've had across the last couple of years since Rick Pitino has been back at St. John's. And God bless the Big East when it's good like that. As a kid who loved UConn basketball and still does to this day, when I obviously went to Winthrop. My grandfather played at East Carolina, so I watch East Carolina in football. I'm explaining this so everybody gets it now. My school is Winthrop University. That's for basketball, baseball, they don't play football. Never lost. Undefeated, baby. Lacrosse, all that. They have my first devotion. That's always going to be the case. And the Winthrop men's basketball program, 2 seed in the Big South Conference tournament. Looking forward to that. Had a player, Logan Duncan, win Big South Player of the Year. Head coach Mark Prosser was co-coach of the year in the conference. A lot of other players recognized as well. Winthrop is my college. They are my alma mater. And that will be the case till the day I die. But as a child, in collegiate sports, the teams I rooted for, East Carolina in football and baseball, because my grandmother and grandfather went there, and they, my granddad played football at East Carolina. My one hair is just like sticking right there. Whatever. He played there. My grandmother cheered there. It has always mattered to me. I've been going to games at Dowdy Ficklin since I was, yay high. And then UConn, from my grandparents from Connecticut, that has always been my fascination, is the UConn basketball program. And, people could say, we only get one school. And it's like, well, guess what, dumbass? I only moved to the state however many years ago, and I picked a school that was close to home, and I became a Winthrop Eagle, and I'm a Winthrop Eagle for life. But they don't play every sport, and let's be honest, they're playing in the Big South. They don't get the attention. They don't get the national recognition. They don't get the opportunities some of those bigger colleges get. And, I'm not going to throw away being a fan of the colleges I went, before I got to school. They never supersede my college. Like if East Carolina played Winthrop in baseball, I'm rooting for Winthrop. If they played, UConn in basketball, it's going to be Winthrop. That's just the way it is. And I don't think anybody has an issue with that. That's the way it's supposed to be. I have a lot of friends that went to Winthrop that were South Carolina fans or Clemson fans or Wake Forest or Michigan State or some shit like that. And everybody's fine. It's all tiered. And especially in college sports. Now, you do that shit in pro sports, you're psycho. That's different. But UConn to me was always like the basketball program that I loved to watch. And when the Big South and the Big East was great, when you had Syracuse, Louisville, Cincinnati, you had a lot of those schools that end up leaving the conference over the years, and leave Marquette and St. John's. Creighton gets in there, Butler gets in there. It has restabilized itself to a bit. But that win the other night for UConn over St. John's really helps them. Might get them in the picture for that final 1 seed. Probably going to help their cause if they can go out and win the Big East, which they have a strong chance of doing. But again, Florida, the reigning national champs, are back in the mix after probably not the fastest start in the world. And then you get down to the bubble and you get some interesting storylines there. As for in the Carolinas, which always comes back to, because I grew up in the triangle, you've got UNC, you've got Duke. Like we said, Duke's looking really dominant right now in a lot of regards, and Duke fans hate that because they want to be looked at as some sort of underdog, like you get the benefit of the doubt. You don't. Sorry, tough shit. You're a Duke fan. That's the way it works. Carolina, same deal. They don't really get the benefit of the doubt although this year has been a trend back in the right direction compared to some of the missteps of the Hubert Davis era. NC State's starting to shape back up a bit, but there's still some frustration amongst the fan base about Will Wade and this team itself. Wake Forest is kind of an up and down mess right now to some extent. So, the schools that I grew up around obviously get a lot of my attention as well as far as when it comes to this time of year. But it'll be a great tournament. I think this year there are a couple really strong candidates, but much unlike last year where I think we were so top heavy that there were no real upsets. The upsets were gone from last year's. It was very cut and dry. 1-1, 2-2, 2-1, that's just the way it worked. And that's very rare in the tournament to be that consistent top to bottom the way it was. I think you're going to see a little bit more volatility this year, which is always the recipe for an exciting, fun tournament. I do think, to the point though, there are 2 or 3 really good teams that are going to be in the hunt for this. And if they don't, all bets are off. If your Dukes don't roll through their respective bracket, if Michigan doesn't roll through their respective bracket, Arizona, Houston, UConn, there are some opportunities there for some really good teams to make it all the way through. But there's some real depth to this. There's there's Miami of Ohio for, people that are interested in some of the underdog stories, the smaller programs getting in there and making a big way. Nebraska is really good at basketball for some reason right now, which is hilarious because Indiana won a national title in football and Nebraska is good at basketball. That would never have been the case 30 years ago. And I think if you asked both fan bases right now, they would switch spots respectively and be like, yep, Indiana good at basketball, Nebraska good at football. But that's not the timeline we live in. Michigan State's back into being a factor again, even though Tom Izzo seems to always come up short when we say he has a good team. He overperforms with a team that's not necessarily supposed to be as good. And then when they give him real expectation, they fall flat on their face. I don't know. I don't know how far I can throw them. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, but we'll see what happens. And I love this time of year. And we'll get a bit more breakdown of it when we can have more time to delve into it. This is just kind of your appetizer, so to speak, for the tournament, what we're going to bring you here with the show. We'll even give you picks, predictions. If you want to make some bets on the game, we'll tell you who to do that on. We'll tell you that once we get a better idea as the bracket starts to shape itself out. But we're going to wrap the show up this week with what's got my attention this week. And it is a documentary that I watched airing on Amazon Prime Video. It is a title, Man on the Run. It is the story of Paul McCartney and his musical career starting Wings post the Beatles. And I have to tell you, the last couple of years have been such a hotbed for Beatles-related content. Obviously, since they struck up that deal several years back with Disney+, there have been so many Beatles-centric related releases. There's the 8 Days a Week that was released on Hulu years ago. There was, you had the Get Back project, which was the entire rough cut version of what later became Let It Be. Then they remastered Let It Be, the movie. There's the Beatles 63 doc about, or 60, not 63. When they first came to America, that documentary got put out on Disney+. I haven't actually watched that in its entirety. There's, cleaned up versions of the movies that have all come back out, like A Hard Day's Night in recent years. And there are the Sam Mendes 4 biopics that we're going to get for each member of the Beatles coming up in the coming years. So there's a lot of Beatles-centric content. And then there's also the Paul-centric content, which is there was already a release last year around the making of one of the Wings album. I think it was called One Hand Clapping. It was a kind of a behind-the-scenes look at some of that stuff. And then Amazon releases Man on the Run, which is the period of time between the immediate breakup of the Beatles to Paul McCartney's solo career, beginning with McCartney, the first album, working his way through Wings, and then basically wrapping Wings up, and showing you a real maturation process of Paul McCartney's life from the breakup of the Beatles. And you have to remember how young the Beatles were when they ended up splintering off and going their separate ways, and what they meant to the world at the time. And when Paul McCartney kind of became a recluse for a period of time in 69, 70 before he relaunched with his musical career, and how much of the blame was put on Paul for breaking up the Beatles because of the way he told the public he was leaving. John had already left. The Beatles were already broken up, but they were hush-hush because they were trying to renegotiate contracts and everything. And it really provides a great insight to people like myself that are nerds and fascinated by this stuff, but, get to see it in the context of the time, because we can't go back to that time. But for generations of people, they're like, oh, it's Paul's fault the Beatles broke up, or it's John's or George or whoever. It's been clarified through all these documentaries. But what's so cool about this one is it's very upfront, very human, and very real in showing Paul's kind of stumbles and kind of his working through what he was going to be like as a solo artist, because let's face it, the McCartney-Lennon songwriting partnership is the greatest musical pairing of all time. And both those guys had careers to go on after. And, they're different peaks and valleys in both those respective solo careers. And obviously before John's is cut tragically short in 1980. So it really does put you in Paul's mind for that time and kind of give you a look at what was going through his thought process, how he, involved his family with Linda McCartney and his kids at the time, and just the maturation process of a guy who was so young as a Beatle, having to figure out the rest of his life now that the Beatles are gone, because basically he's out of high school or whatever, and now he's a Beatle. I can't imagine what kind of, whirlwind behavior that had to feel like at the time, or how an experience like that could be. But this documentary does a really good job of that. It provides great insight into the workings of wings, which even as a kid, I remember being a big deal, but you realize it's kind of like World War II. You think about it as a kid, you think the United States was involved in World War II longer than they actually were. And then when you think of wings, you think of wings as this big thing that produced a lot of good music, some better than others, some not so much. But you figure Wings was a bigger part of the Paul McCartney arc than it actually is, as far as the timeline, really only existing from the early 70s to 1980. So that paints a really good picture. It's worth your time if you have Prime Video to watch Man on the Run. I highly recommend this. I finished it today, so it's fresh in my mind with all these thoughts. And again, Paul McCartney's one of the most charming son of a guns to ever live. Like I could listen to him talk about the phone book, and I'd be like, all right, I'll tune into that. So it was a lot of fun. It's a really cool documentary. And that is what's got my attention for this week. It's a shortened week, so maybe there are other things that might have gotten my attention. But once I saw that come out, I think it came out last week, I was ready to watch it. I was ready to go. I'd been waiting on it. And I finally sat down today and watched it. So could bring that information to you here on the show. But that's going to wrap up our show. We thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Get the show in its entirety on those platforms. You download it on Spotify, you get the video just like this. Or if you want to download it on Apple, you can just get the audio version, take it anywhere with you. You can also go on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Moonlight Media Works YouTube channel and get every episode, get shorts, get other things like that. Then on TikTok, we now have a TikTok account for me. If you want to follow us or follow me, I keep saying us. I'm trying to make this sound bigger and more important. It's CollinsJ98 on TikTok, and you can check me out there when I'll be posting clips and things, other content that I'm not necessarily posting all the time up here. To be honest with you, it's really easy to post stuff to TikTok, so we'll be putting more stuff up there as well. My qualms about that platform aside, they're quite easy to work with right now, and it's been fun so far. So you have a lot of ways to check out the show. For anybody that does, though, we thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of The Collins Janus Show, a Moonlight Media Works production. The preceding episode was a production of Moonlight Media Works.